Explosions ripple across the South China Sea as Pentagon war games flash the same outcome again and again. America loses to China. Not in theory, not in 100 years from now, but now, in every simulation run by its own defense analysts. The image of an untouchable superpower is gone, replaced by a sobering reality. The United States is struggling to maintain the very system it built. The empire of bases, once seen as America's greatest advantage, now looks like a liability. Nearly 750 sites scattered across 80 countries drain more than $55 billion annually, according to the Quincy Institute. And when hidden costs are included, the figure climbs over $80 billion. The rationale was deterrence, but locals from Okinawa to Djibouti increasingly see occupation, not stability. That contradiction eats away at Washington's moral claim to leadership. And the financial foundation is buckling under the weight of its own promises. U.S. national debt crossed $37 trillion in August 2025, the Treasury confirmed, adding $1 trillion every 5 months, double the pace of just a decade ago. The interest bill alone now exceeds $1 trillion per year, more than defense or Medicare. Chairman Jody Arrington of the House Budget Committee called it an unprecedented drain, warning that debt service has become the single fastest growing line item in the federal budget. What happens when the world's policeman can't afford his own badge? For decades, the dollar gave Washington a magic shield. Its dominance meant deficits could be financed indefinitely. Sanctions could cripple adversaries without firing a shot. But Bloomberg reports that BRICS nations now trade a growing share of commodities in their own currencies, while central banks from India to Brazil add gold and yuan to reserves. The Financial Times notes that the dollar's share of global reserves has slid to about 58%, its lowest in a quarter century. This isn't collapse, but erosion. And erosion is irreversible once trust gives way. Trust, after all, has always been America's hidden currency. The belief that United States institutions worked, that contracts were honored, that markets were fair. Yet Gallup polling in 2023 showed 80% of Americans believe their nation is divided on its most fundamental values, the highest figure ever recorded. When a country doubts itself, why should allies believe more? That's the paradox. America still fields the most expensive military in history. The Pentagon's budget is on course to surpass $1 trillion annually, Reuters reported, after Congress approved a $150 billion boost for next-generation bombers, ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons. Yet even with trillion-dollar spending, the same Pentagon admits in classified exercises it loses when facing China in Taiwan scenarios. Quantity of dollars does not guarantee quality of outcomes. If overseas bases are essential, how did the United States strike Iran in June 2025 with B-2 bombers and cruise missiles launched from thousands of miles away, without Middle Eastern bases at all? The Washington Post described the operation as proof that technology now substitutes for presence. This undermines the logic of costly global basing. Billions may be poured into installations that no longer deliver decisive advantage. If power projection works from afar, what exactly are American taxpayers buying with 750 foreign footprints? That question cuts deeper when paired with the fiscal trap. Reuters reported that the July 2025 tax and spending bill could add $3 trillion more to deficits in a decade, potentially pushing debt to GDP past 200% by 2050. Under Treasury's extreme scenario, it could reach 535% by 2100. Numbers so large they defy comprehension. But they matter, because creditors see them. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, warned in June that rising U.S. debt now poses the single greatest risk to America's market standing. Investors no longer assume treasuries are untouchable. So the new question emerges. If military projection no longer requires sprawling bases, and if financing those bases accelerates the debt spiral, why does America persist in sustaining them? Is it strategy or inertia? A defense industrial complex too entrenched to dismantle itself. Meanwhile, allies are recalculating. The Financial Times reported in July that India settled a record $12 billion in oil trades with the UAE using rupees, not dollars. Brazil and China expanded a swap line that lets their firms avoid the greenback entirely. Each deal is small on its own, but together they form an architecture of alternatives. Washington calls it fragmentation. Others call it sovereignty. Inside the United States, the fractures are widening. Gallup data show trust in government and media near historic lows, and confidence in the Supreme Court at just 27%. The glue that held the Pax Americana together, belief in a system worth emulating, is drying up. And when the example fades at home, the export loses power abroad. The contradiction grows sharper. America spends $1 trillion a year on defense, yet struggles to supply allies with artillery shells because industrial capacity just cannot keep pace. The Wall Street Journal reported in April that European stockpiles ran dry within months of supporting Ukraine, forcing the Pentagon to ration deliveries. A superpower unable to meet basic supply demands looks less like Rome at its height, more like Britain bleeding through 2 world wars. At the same time, the Federal Reserve faces political pressure to cut interest rates faster than inflation allows. Reuters called it the risk of fiscal dominance. Policy dictated not by economics, but by Washington's need to fund deficits cheaply. Independence of the central bank, once America's credibility anchor, now looks negotiable. Markets see the cracks, and markets have long memories. The irony is thick. While America threatens tariffs on more than 90 countries, as the Wall Street Journal reported, it is those tariffs that fracture alliances once built on free trade. Europe resists, India hedges, even Canada under Prime Minister Mark Carney balances loyalty with leverage. A hegemon whose greatest export was rules now bends them at will. And so we return to the battlefield. The Pentagon says hypersonic missiles could neutralize carriers within 20 minutes of conflict. If that is true, then the core of U.S. power projection, 10 carrier strike groups, may already be obsolete. Yet Congress still funds them at $13 billion apiece, while deficits balloon. Technology exposes the obsolescence. Politics preserves it. That is not strategy. That is inertia hardened into policy. Yet, even as the Pentagon absorbs record budgets, the U.S. defense supply chain has quietly shifted overseas. The Wall Street Journal reported that nearly 70% of rare earth elements vital for precision-guided missiles and fighter jet electronics are imported from China. This dependence leaves America exposed to the very rival it is preparing to fight. The contradiction couldn't be sharper, trillions spent on weapons, but raw materials sourced from an adversary. Financial credibility faces an equally destabilizing trap. Fitch Ratings downgraded U.S. credit in 2023 for the first time in over a decade, citing political brinkmanship and unsustainable debt trajectories. By 2025, yields on 10-year treasuries hovered at levels unseen since the early 2000s, as Bloomberg noted, raising the cost of borrowing across the economy. This isn't a footnote. Every mortgage, every car loan, every business credit line becomes more expensive, tightening the domestic economy while Washington spends abroad. And credibility on the world stage. Reuters highlighted that when Washington called for new sanctions against Russia in June, fewer than half of the G20 joined. Nations that once aligned reflexively with the U.S. now calculate costs more openly, hedging between East and West. The narrative of leadership erodes when alignment is no longer automatic. So the crisis sharpens into a viral truth. America's greatest threat is not external assault, but internal contradiction. A superpower simultaneously overarmed, overleveraged, and undertrusted. The spectacle is global and the stakes are irreversible. Where does this leave the story? Perhaps the end of United States hegemony is not a sudden collapse, not Rome sacked or Britain bankrupted, but a slow fading, one broken alliance, one downgraded bond rating, one lost principle at a time. Bloomberg framed it simply. Erosion, not explosion. That erosion is happening in plain sight. America may not fall to an external enemy at all. Its empire may dissolve under the weight of its own contradictions. Trillions spent to defend bases. Technology has made redundant. Deficits financed by a currency trust is draining away. A divided society selling unity abroad while fractured at home. The tragedy is not that the world took hegemony from America. The tragedy is that America may give it up itself, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the memory of power once assumed eternal. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.